Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the January the 14th Budget and Finance Committee meeting for the City of Franklin. We will begin with the following announcement. The Budget and Finance Committee meeting will limit physical access in the meeting room due to current limitations on public meetings. Accommodations have been made to ensure that the public is able to participate in the meeting. The public may participate in the following ways. Watch the meeting on Franklin TV or the City of Franklin website. Watch the live stream through the City of Franklin Facebook and YouTube accounts. Call into the conference meeting at 1-312-626-6799. Meeting ID is 913-3435-7198. Passcode is 372109. Callers will be unmuted and given an opportunity to comment during the meeting at specific times. Limited viewing will be available in the lobby of City Hall to watch the live video and make public comment. The public may email comments and questions prior to 1 p.m. on the day of the meeting to recorder at franklintn.gov to be read live. Live comments and those submitted by email will be limited to 2 minutes. City YouTube is www.youtube.com/user/City of Franklin. The city Facebook is www.facebook.com/City of Franklin. And the city website is www.franklintn.gov/Franklin TV. Let's call the meeting to order with a roll call vote. Alderman Speedy, are you present?
Present.
Alderman Peterson, are you present?
Present.
And the chair is present. Let's go to item number 1, which is consideration of resolution 2020-279, a resolution declaring that the Budget and Finance Committee shall meet on January 14, 2021, and conduct its essential business by electronic means rather than being required to gather a quorum of the members physically present in the same location because it is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of Tennesseans in light of the COVID-19 outbreak. I'll entertain a motion.
Move for approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all right. Let's do a roll call vote. Alderman Speedy, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Let's go to approval of minutes. Consideration of approval of minutes of the December 3rd, 2020 Budget and Finance Committee meeting. I will also entertain a motion to that effect.
Move for approval.
Second.
Proper motion, second. Let's do a roll call vote on that. Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Speedy, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes on that. Let's go to new business. Consideration of resolution 2021-271, a resolution certifying consideration resolution 20-271, a resolution certifying deposit accounts and loans. Christine, you and Mike are on this. You are up.
It shows muted.
Yeah, we're working on a technical difficulty here.
There you go.
Just try this again. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
We can hear you now.
This resolution 271 actually an update on resolution 2016. It is a resolution that establishes who the city authorized to sign bank account and who's also our primary contacts with the bank from our staff. This current version of the resolutions update was Mayor Moore, City Administrator accounts, and also our comptroller, Mike Lowe, and Margaret Wilson is our primary contacts with the banks on our bank accounts.
We're having some trouble hearing Christine. It's very quiet, so I don't know if you can.
Go ahead and try now. Does this sound better?
Oh, yes.
That sounds quite a bit better. Okay. Mr. Chairman, should I just quickly give that?
I would go back over what you covered, yes.
Okay. Resolution 2020-271 is a update of a resolution that was approved back in 2016 that establishes who from the city is authorized to sign for bank accounts that are in the city's name. It also establishes who from the staff are our primary contacts with bank accounts. The resolution does establish that Mayor Moore, City Administrator Eric Stuckey, and myself are the signees for bank accounts. And it authorizes Mike Lowe, our comptroller, and Margaret Wilson, our financial manager, as our contact people on bank accounts. So that's the only, that's the summary of what this resolution is. And we did need to update it because we did need to change my name in the resolution, my phone number in the resolution, and also we added Margaret Wilson in her new role as financial manager.
Do we need a motion to approve this and send it to the full board? I'll entertain a motion on resolution 2020-271, a resolution certifying deposit accounts and loans. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Proper motion is a second.
Second.
Let's do a roll call vote. Alderman Speedy, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Let's go to item 4 then, a consideration of recommendation to reject all proposals for custody service for non-pension investments of the city for the finance department, purchasing office procurement solicitation number 2020-027, $9,500 budgeted in 110-85520-141500 for fiscal year 2021. Christine, you are up again, or Brian, or Mike.
I'll take this one, and I have the moral support of Brian Wilcox and Mike also on this meeting with me. This is a item that this committee has seen several times in the last couple of years. This procurement for the custody services for our non-pension investments, and we are unfortunately back again because we've not been able to come to terms with the most recent bank that we attempted to obtain contract terms with. This service, it's actually a custody service for us, is a bank account with a bank who we actually settle our transactions for the city investments through this account. It is a service that over the years, there's not as many banks that provide this service. However, it is very important to us. Pretty much once a month, we have maturities of investments that are settling. Either we have a maturity that is coming in, or we purchase another maturity investment, or we pull those funds back into our city bank accounts. It's a service that, while it's not terribly expensive to our budget, it's extremely important to us, and to make sure that we have a bank that can provide the services and be accurate in how they handle our transactions. We did the current provider, our contract expired a while back. So we went out for a procurement. We did recommend staying with our existing provider, Fifth Third Bank. And we unfortunately were not able to reach contract terms between the attorneys for Fifth Third and our own attorneys. So we asked to go back out to bid and do another procurement process. And then that's when we have actually gone to the first two proposals in our rankings, and we have not been able to reach terms with either of our first two. The first one, actually, one of our standard terms of our procurement was to require cyber insurance. And after they said they did have cyber insurance. It turns out they actually did not have that. We just had to disqualify that proposal. We went to our number two proposal, and we're not able to reach contract terms with the second proposal firm between their attorneys and our attorneys. So our committee just really is not comfortable going to the third ranking from that proposal. It is something that it's just we as a committee, a staff committee, could not recommend that to you. So what we are back here asking for is to reject all proposals. There were 5 in that procurement. We'd like to reject. We are still using Fifth Third until we can find a new bank, a new contract to go into place. But we are going to be reviewing that RFP very closely, as well as look to see perhaps some banks that are used by just Tennessee, local governments, state governments. Perhaps some of the issues that we've been running into, we might be able to streamline if we could look at some firms that are used by some of the other Tennessee governments, and perhaps some of the contract issues maybe will not be so difficult. But it has this is something that Brian and I have talked about is pretty unexpected that we've had some of these struggles, but the staff does recommend that we reject all the proposals and go back out probably this summer.
Any questions from any of the committee members? Alderman Peterson, Alderman Speedy, any questions?
No questions. Yeah.
Let me ask this question then. Does this just go on the report to the full board, or how do you want to handle that?
We're asking you to reject all, to have a consideration to reject these proposals.
Okay.
You would need to recommend it to the board. The board would be the one that would reject it. So
Got it.
This would be just passed on to them.
Then let's do it by motion. I would make the motion then to consider the recommendation to reject all proposals for custody service for non-pension investments. Do I hear a second on that?
Second.
Still roll call vote. Alderman Speedy, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes to that. All right. Let's go to item 5, consideration of draft resolution 2020-294, resolution adopting budget goals for the fiscal year 2021-2022. Eric, do you want to start that off?
Yeah, I'll kick that off. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. Michael is with me as well. He can chime in here as well, but I'll kick it off. Budget season has started, and the next 2 items reflect that. These are the budget goals that we have are recommending to you for the fiscal 22 budget that we see coming, and want to walk through those with you briefly today. I would ask at the end of this that you take action to forward that to the full board for their vote at the next meeting. But I'll touch on it. Again, this has been influenced by what we've experienced in the last year, the pandemic. And I shared with you back in October an updated effort in terms of focusing our work and what we called a stronger Franklin, and the idea that we want to come out of these challenging times a stronger community a even more competitive community. And to do that, we need to have some focal points to help guide our efforts. And that came in the shape of 4 P words: pandemic, and our response to that as we continue, that continues to evolve. People, that we take care of our people, both our citizens and residents within the community, but also our city team, the people that make our city work, that we are looking at ways to meet their needs in these unusual times, that we continue to focus on delivering key projects, the infrastructure needs that are impacted by being one of the fastest growing communities in America. How do we make sure we're maintaining quality of life, and the infrastructure work that you all have identified is continuing and being delivered on? And then finally, the possibilities, meaning the financial capacity, is there to support both our ongoing operational works and the need of the community, but also, other projects and opportunities that may come our way to meet community needs. So that will be a primary focus to continue to meet the evolving needs of our community in this budget, and restore areas that need to be restored. We did a budget last year in the midst of the economic shutdown and the uncertainty of a pandemic. We know more now than we did then, but there is still a decent amount of uncertainty. So that will influence how we develop the budget is recommended to you and the budget that is implemented throughout the upcoming year. So a couple key things I would focus in on the goals themselves. Of course, we put it in a couple different segments related to the financial capacity, or financial goals, which deal with managing our capacity appropriately, living within our means, being consistent with the policies that you've put in place, that we look at ways to stabilize our revenue structure and what that looks like. And as we go into the next item, which is your revenue model, you'll see there are some unique nuances to that in the wake of the pandemic, and also as we head into a reevaluation year in terms of that process, which happens every 5 years, and that we continue to look at what that means for us, and that we comply with your policies that you've put in place. In terms of non-financial goals, that we again are looking at service delivery, service standards, that we're meeting those, that our infrastructure is fully funded in the ways that it needs to be, that our water and wastewater utilities are fully self-sufficient in meeting their operating and debt needs, and that is structured for the long haul as well. That we look for ways to cooperate and collaborate with our partners at the county and at the state on economic development opportunities and maintain our competitive position. And again, the 2022 specific goals relate to evolving needs out of the pandemic, looking at our position in terms of being an employer of choice within the community, within the broader region, and that we are looking at ways that are where's our pay structure in that market. We had, before the pre-pandemic, we had been looking at a full update of our pay plan. We obviously weren't able to do that, but we need to be mindful of where we are and that we're remaining competitive. And then we do have an ongoing goal to continue to look at the ways we look at housing affordability in our community, that we look at what are our opportunities to facilitate workforce housing, especially within our community. And then, of course, the delivery of key priority capital projects. And we have a lot of those underway, and we'll see some important ones move forward. Expect to open Mac Hatcher this coming year. Significant progress towards the completion of the wastewater plant expansion and upgrade. While that won't be completed in this fiscal year, it'll be getting very close. And again, initiation of projects that you've seen, like the Franklin Road, the trails along 96 West, the pedestrian bridge at Harlansdale, McEwen 4, all are making significant progress, and you'll see those projects advance, and we're again looking at ways to deliver those efficiently. And I'll stop there. I don't know, Michael, if you want to add anything to that. Some of these goals are familiar, but then we've got a unique circumstance as the pandemic and economic challenges have faced us like every other community across the country.
I would just add to that, when you take a look at the resolution 2020-294 as it's structured, the goals are also aligned with one of the four themes of our strategic plan, Franklin Forward. That is a continuation of efforts we've tried to do to tie the elements of the strategic plan into operational budgets, and thus also allow departments to have ownership over the ongoing goals and the strategically important goals simply for fiscal 22. The Stronger Franklin theme and framework is going to sort of dominate, departmental budget assembly and review this year, and certainly when we bring it back to you. But we don't want to ever lose sight of the fact that we had a guiding document before and maintain all of our planning processes in the same way. And the strategic plan is vitally important for how we manage our finances and provide for operations.
So one other comment that really probably touches a little more on process than the goals themselves, but I think this is a good time to touch on it. You'll see a little different in a typical budget year. You see sort of discussion around base budget, ongoing operations, and then what we call program enhancements, things that departments bring forward that are initiatives that improve our services, address needs in the community, may generate additional revenue, other things that help us operate better, we think, in serving the community. You're going to see a tier in between that this year, which is really going to be a discussion around what we restore in budgets that we removed or curtailed in the fiscal 21 budget. So we want to have a discussion around what makes sense to restore and what, we may have learned some things that may change the way in which we deliver some things. So there's not just an automatic restoration. There will be a consideration about how we look at how we modified our budget a year ago and what makes sense to restore. And are there things that have been modified further as we made changes this year? So there may be a little bit of a middle ground around how we work between what is the current base budget and what had been our previous base budget or baseline of operations. And so that will be an intentional discussion we have, especially on the staff side as we bring it forward to you. So just anticipate that there may be an additional sort of layer in between base budget and enhancements that we will talk to you about as well. And I'll stop there, answer any questions you have. And again, we'd ask you to vote on this to recommend it to the board, and we'll bring that to the next board meeting.
Any questions from the committee? Alderman Speedy, Alderman Peterson, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Then I'll entertain a motion to approve draft resolution 2020-294 with the understanding that recommendation is for this resolution to go to the full board for a vote on and hopefully support from the full board. Do I hear a motion?
I move that we recommend this to the full board.
Second.
A motion and a second. Alderman Speedy, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes to that. Okay, let's go to presentation of the City of Franklin's revenue estimate and model for fiscal year 2021-2022.
So Michael's going to guide you through this. Again, this is the typical time we do this in January. This is our first cut at the revenue models and the revenue elements. And this gives you our initial thinking. This continues to evolve throughout the budget process. A lot of times we bring back a revised model to you around April timeframe. I would expect something along those lines, but again, this is a different situation and things continue to change and modify, and we'll continue to do that with these revenue projections and the revenue model overall. We'll have Michael walk you through it, and I may, or Christine may chime in a time or two on certain items of interest, but Michael will lead you through this. Take it away.
Well, good afternoon and Happy New Year, everyone. It is the beginning of budget season, as Eric said, and one of the things that we like to do, because we think it's the right place to start, is to know how much we have available to spend before we try to figure out a plan on how to spend it. One of the things that we'll be focused on in this particular presentation. It's going to look very similar to others, but certainly trying to do forecasting of any kind in the current climate and over the course of the last 12 to 18 months has been anything but an easy thing to do. So we always start in a more conservative way. We have very limited information of the current fiscal year. We only have 4 months of receipts. So we try to do our best with the information we have. What we'll do today, though, is we will review our assumptions and how we've come up with these numbers. We'll provide an all funds summary. So how much does it cost to really operate the entire city, regardless of funding source? And then the fund that we spend the most amount of time with, because it's most directly related to the taxpayers, and that's the general fund. We do have about 8 slides that have individual fund breakouts, and then we'll do a closing and next steps. So we budget for 14 funds annually. Traditionally, the last 5 or 6 years we've done this, we've presented you with low, medium, and high values. When in doubt, we choose the middle ground or the medium value. This preliminary revenue assessment is based upon projections from the Tennessee State Funding Board that are made in November of each year, historical performance, and our best guess of economic trends. Some of you may wonder what the Tennessee State Funding Board is. It is a group of individuals who do get together on a regular basis throughout the year. But in their November meeting and their December meetings tend to be the ones that we are most focused on, because that's when a group of economists from the Boyd Center at UT, from East Tennessee State University, from the Department of Revenue, and from the Fiscal Review Committee present their estimates for economic trends, unemployment statistics, labor statistics, and what they believe state revenues will be in the upcoming year. Since tens of millions of dollars the city of Franklin is based upon consumption taxes, and a lot of it comes from state shared taxes, we rely on those experts to kind of give us a range, and then we look at how we've performed and then give you our best guess of where we think we're going to be in those categories. And as I said, the January model is always conservative. Future forecasts will be refined, and hopefully we will continue to progress in getting the pandemic under control, and various aspects of the economy will get better. But let's take a step back, shall we? The world, state, regional, and local economy experienced the most tumultuous year of our lifetimes in 2020. Never was there a year where there was a greater economic shock than the months of March, April, and May, when entire segments of our economy, locally and otherwise, simply were forced to shut down. The impact of the pandemic has been dramatic, it's been shocking, and it remains unresolved. But if you go back 12 months ago when I was talking at this time, the city of Franklin, the state of Tennessee, and the United States were in the middle of our longest continuous period of economic expansion in our history. Unemployment was very, very low. In fact, in November of last year, the unemployment rate in the city of Franklin was an estimated 2.1%. And most governments and certainly businesses were experiencing record or near record revenue growth. However, as we all know, in March, all of that changed. By early April, multiple sections of the economy resulted in record unemployment, plummeting revenues, and great uncertainty. As a result of that climate, we responsibly scaled back what we believed revenue estimates would be for the end of fiscal 20 and for fiscal 21. We simply had no idea of knowing if shutdowns were going to be the pattern that we would see in the future, and what revenue reductions would be necessary beyond what we forecast to survive the rest of calendar year 2020 and fiscal 21. Thankfully, it didn't happen that way. If you go back, we estimated for the end of fiscal 20 probably a net sales tax loss of between 20 and 25%, and very, very significant losses. And in fact, our revised estimate for sales tax collections in April of 2020 was a reduction of 75%. And it only ended up being between 25 and 30 for that 1 month. So whereas we estimated that we would possibly need to spend $5 million of fund balance to make ends meet to close the fiscal year, and we estimated that local sales tax would be down between 20 and 25% for the year, at the end of the day, it was only down 2%. And as a result, the city did not need to dip into reserves to balance the budget for fiscal 20. The other key lesson that we've learned about the pandemic economy so far is that not all industries were affected equally. Tourism and entertainment industries are still severely curtailed, and you will see when we get to the hotel motel tax in particular, how that affects our bottom line here in the city of Franklin. However, you'll also see when you look at the development funds, and you've seen in development reports, that development activity within the city hasn't been significantly affected during the pandemic to this point in time. So, where are we? For fiscal 22, we are forecasting all funds revenues of $155.6 million, which is a $5.4 million increase over fiscal 21, or about 3.6%. The general fund remains the largest of those funds, at just under 50% at 48.2, and the drug fund at 0.1. There's no significant shifts or moves really in between any of the proportionality of any of these funds in terms of revenues from one year to the next. For the general fund, we're forecasting revenues of $75 million, which is an increase of 3.8% or $2.77 million off of the revised fiscal 21 budget. We will mention this as we go through these slides, but keep in mind, we passed a budget, recommended a budget, which you passed in late June of last year, and then came back to you in October, and then finally got through the ordinance reading process in November, in which we raised revenue estimates to afford cost of living adjustments and some targeted restorations within operations, because we could see that the economy was not as worse as we thought it would. It's important when you look at this chart that there is a shift, and that is that the sales tax portion has actually grown over the last year. That is not solely a result of the pandemic, as it is the fact that we are counting the full year of the 0.5% of sales tax which had been going to Williamson County schools, which is now coming towards the city of Franklin. We'll get into that detail in a moment. One of our favorite charts, certainly, is as we've gone through things over the years, you can see the consumption versus wealth and assets chart. This has shifted as well, and part of it is because of the fact that the hall income tax is no longer being collected in fiscal 22. We are making no assumptions, or making nominal assumptions for growth in property tax, but simply the normal growth of about 3%. And sales taxes are increasing significantly as a result of 100% of that money that was going to Williamson County coming back to us. So let's talk about our most important revenue source. Local sales tax can be found in detail on page 6 of your packets. Keep in mind this presentation and the 30-page full revenue model are in your packets online. We're estimating approximately $40.1 million of collections over a modified or revised fiscal 21 budget of $34.8 million. We are trending above budget estimates for the first 4 months this year, and that would put us in at a estimated collection of $36.2 million for fiscal 21. This is an increase of $5.4 million, or nearly 15.4% over the prior year. Now, it's important to remember a couple of things here. Number one, the fiscal 21 budget, after we raised it in October, November, still assumed a 10% reduction from the prior year. We've maintained a degree of conservatism within the current year's budget because we did not know simply where the economy would go. We are also lowering the historic rate of growth that we base upon sales tax from what had been 3.25 last year and 3.5 in prior years to 2.5%. Because when you look at the 25-year trend at this point, taking into account fiscal 2020 and taking into account the losses during the Great Recession, the 25-year curve is only at 2.55%. So we're taking the lower at 2.5. I should let you know that the state composite index for state shared or state sales tax is between 0% increase and 4%. And generally most are in the 3% range. So we are about 0.5% lower than the state's forecasts at this point in time. The addition of the 0.5% of local sales tax currently allocated to Williamson County has been added 100% to the general fund and 100% to general fund operations. If you remember, we had proposed when we were developing the long-range financial model in the last several years that we would split this amount half or 60%-ish to operations and the rest to capital. We're proposing that we put 100% towards the operating budget in fiscal 22 because there are grants which we received from the state to offset revenue losses, which will not repeat in fiscal 21. So although we are forecasting a $2.8 million growth in the general fund revenues, we have revenues which are not going to be repeated that we have to be mindful of.
And Michael, I would just add here too, that same approach then will need to integrate into our look at capital funding capacity. I think we see this as really a 1 year thing. And if it needs to be another year, that's fine. But long term, we still see us going back to the roughly 50-50 split between half of that going to operations and half of that going to capital projects. So this is a fortunate capacity that we're able to use to help us work through this challenging time.
Michael, if I could just jump in, that the two revenue sources that Michael was discussing that are not going to reoccur in fiscal 22. The first is the $1.8 million state appropriation that was funded in the state budget that we received at the start of fiscal year 21 back in summer of 20. That $1.8 million was a one-time grant for us. And then Michael's also referring to the Tennessee CARES Act, in which we received an allocation from the federal government through the federal CARES program, sent money to the state, and we had an allocation. We have not actually budgeted that because we are still receiving. We've received most of it, but we've got a little piece of the $1.2 million that was allocated to Franklin, and accounting and budget will be reconciling that for a subsequent budget amendment. So it's about $3 million of one-time revenue that we received in fiscal 21 that we have no expectation of receiving in fiscal 22.
As I mentioned, continuing our closer look at the local sales tax, there is a year-over-year 2.55% increase over the past 25 years. That is a remarkable testament to the strength of Franklin's economy, that it still has been increasing on average by 2.5% year over year. As I mentioned as well, the FY20 sales tax collections were a decrease year over year of 2.2%. The average growth rate for sales tax from 11 to 20 is only 1.6%, and that takes into account being at a low point and ending on a low point, and then a lot of growth in the middle. But when you average it all out, the last 10 years have only been at about 1.6%. The state, as I mentioned as well, predicts about a 0 to 4% increase in the sales tax, and our sales tax does tend to mirror the state sales tax. For many years of the last decade, we actually trended above the state. The last couple of years, we have kind of been at or below state increases, but never more than 0.5% to 1%, usually during the year. State shared revenues are the second largest revenue of the general fund. Those can be found in detail on page 7. We're forecasting a healthy increase here of 12.3%, or about $1.4 million from fiscal 21 to 22. These increases are all over the place. I will have you know there are some very interesting, to put it mildly, assumptions that some of the economists made on the state funding board, both in state shared taxes and in alcohol taxes. The mixed drink tax we're proposing, we took the average amount when you look at alcohol taxes and expect it to increase 19.5%. There are some economists that believe that's going to nearly go up 40 to 50%. So, as restaurants increase capacity, and people are probably going to want to have a drink or two. You can see on the screen in terms of state sales tax, 3%, beer tax, 1%, excise tax, 6%, and a healthy rebound in business taxes as well at about 7.5%. I will take a moment to say, although the hall income tax is ceasing to exist, there is a new income which will not make up, we believe, for the amount that we certainly received year over year in the hall income tax. But TCA 45304 is a 20% privilege tax on the adjusted gross income earned from sports gambling revenues. The legislature authorized this in the 2019 session. Governor Lee allowed it to go into effect by actually not signing the bill at the time. And this provides for revenues that are earned from gaming to be able to come back to for government services. 80% of the 20% privilege tax goes immediately to the Tennessee Lottery for educational purposes. 15% come to local governments. We will receive it on a quarterly basis. It's going to be assigned a per capita, and it goes back to the last decennial federal census. So we may very well start receiving these payments now, and when the census is certified, obviously that will change again, and our proportionate share would change again. And we can only use these revenues really for capital and infrastructure purposes. So road projects, city buildings, we can't use these revenues necessarily for operations. We are putting in a token amount of $10,000 because it's terribly hard to handicap how much we're going to receive. And really, we won't be able to get you a solid revenue estimate probably until the fiscal 23 budget, because then we'll have at least a year's worth of activity. There's a lot of gaming, there's a lot of apps, there's a lot of businesses that are engaged in this activity. And if you're like me, who likes to turn his television on and watch a sporting event or even the news or pretty much anything, you've seen some of the ads for sports gaming in Tennessee. The last 5%, FYI, goes to mental health and substance abuse efforts to assist those individuals who may have a problem with gambling, which is something that is common when gaming is set up in states. You saw that as well in states that set up casino gaming, that a portion had to go to hotlines and treatment programs for those who may gamble in excess. Page 8 details the property tax. We assume a 3% growth in the base levy from 22.2 to 23.2 million. Of that amount, the net that is given for operations, or that we end up assigning for operations, will be about 8.62 million. It's 8.62 million, which again is an increase of 2.9 to 3%. As Eric mentioned, this is a revaluation year, which means that the overall amount that we will collect in the levy will not change, but that the values should increase, and then of course the rate has to go down. We have heard no indications where we are and what is going on with that, except to expect that that should occur towards the very end of the budget process. So we won't be able to refine a lot of this further, but for budgeting purposes, we are assuming no increase or no recapture of the rate at this point in time. That is a subject which we will certainly talk about more as we get into decision making in the budget year. But these numbers just assume the growth in the levy and nothing additional. Eric, Christine, I don't know if you want to make any comments regarding the property tax.
Yeah, let me chime in there real quick. As Michael said, it is the revaluation that happens every 5 years. What we're planning at this point is really to maintain the revenue that we expect to receive from the property tax, which would likely mean a decrease in the rate. I do want to remind you, last year we took actions to restructure some of our debt that allowed us to pay principal sooner and retire debt earlier, and save the city several $1 million. That does, though, likely require us to dedicate around a penny to a penny and a half of property tax capacity. So when we set our rate, we will factor in that penny or penny and a half or so. That is some additional debt service capacity that we're going to need to allocate, that again helps us save money down the line with a restructuring that we are, that you all have already supported and that we think is absolutely a great move for the city. But that will be rolled into the mix of setting that rate. Last time this came through, it was around a 10 cent shift in our tax rate. So we'll see what this generates. I would expect that the rate itself will likely go down, even with factoring in that penny to penny and a half that'll help us with some of the debt restructuring that we've already committed to. And as Michael said, that information comes in very late in our process. I would say particularly late of the process that we make a staff, I make my administrator's recommended budget to you. I remember in 2016, I had written the transmittal to the board without knowing the rate, and literally the day or so before I was going to release that letter, we got the rate. So we rewrote everything to reflect what at least the preliminary rate was so that you had that. We don't know when we'll get that rate. We may get it after we submit a budget to you, which means we will not know exactly our property tax rate till a little later in the process. And that's okay. I mean, we have a general sense and we're not relying on it at this point in terms of additional revenue. We're fortunate to have the additional sales tax coming in from the additional half-cent and getting our portion that had previously been dedicated to schools coming in. That sort of helps us with some of the other needs that we have. So, that's kind of where we are. I think we're very fortunate, and even with whatever this may bring, we're going to continue to have one of the lowest property tax rates in the state of Tennessee.
Next revenue source we want to touch on briefly, and I think one of the final ones, the general fund, is building permits and licenses. And we're forecasting about a 10% drop in this category. It's not necessarily due to any anticipation of what will happen with development in Franklin, but rather we've been over budgeting certain permit revenues if we look at the last couple of years, and we want to make that correction. Development as a whole, and I'll touch on it as well when we get to the development slide, was rather robust in fiscal 20 and certainly calendar 20, similar to calendar 19, and seemed almost unaffected by the pandemic. We will not be surprised if there is a little bit of decrease in overall business activity or development activity as we move forward for a couple of reasons. Number one, the last several years have been so robust and have been so healthy that it's hard to maintain that level of activity year after year, month after month. The second is what talking with folks in BNS, and certainly I serve as the city administrator's representative on the Development Services Advisory Committee, and we met yesterday. There's a lot of businesses and a lot of development, a lot of construction that was already in the pipeline and money was committed. If you are an investor, you may very well look at Franklin and say the economy is still humming along and I want to invest here, and we certainly hope that they do. But it will not surprise us if we do see a slight decline in certain areas. Especially when it comes to things such as commercial office buildings. We do have a lot of Class A office space in Franklin. The vacancy rates have started to tick up in those, and I think a lot of businesses and a lot of folks are doing a reassessment in light of the pandemic about how they do operations remotely, virtually, as we are doing this meeting today. And that may impact. Now, we are not changing any forecast. We are not revising any revenue model and estimation model regarding that about the what if, but that is certainly something that we will want to pay some attention to as we move forward in the ensuing years. Shifting now to the sanitation fund. This fund has a forecast decrease of about 5.5% in revenues, and that is not at all a result of decreased usage or certainly, again, the slowing of any development within the city. But there are two one-time revenue sources which were in the 20 and 21 budgets that won't repeat. Now, number one was a small subsidy we put in right at during the budget amendment to help buy a trash packer from the general fund. And then number two, the largest revenue that won't repeat are the one-time setup fees for distributing blue bins. There is a token amount of money for the blue bin setups that is in there for people who will continue to add them. But the large $500,000 that we had estimated to help pay for the cost of setting that program up obviously will not repeat now that the program has been set up. We will at least put up a little flare here and say that we didn't do any fee increases or tax increases last year, with the exception of what had been planned for water and sewer in the budget. If we want to maintain sanitation as a self-sufficient fund, there is some rather dire equipment renewal and replacement because the trucks are used very frequently. And we elevated that to you in the October and November budget amendment. There's 3 or 4 more that need to be replaced, and that will probably result in a recommendation for a monthly fee increase in sanitation. But we will plot all that out and we will let you know that this revenue model at this point in time, however, does not assume any increase in the $19.50 fee. As I mentioned, the development-related funds, you can find them respectively: road impact on page 20, city facilities on page 21, county facilities on page 22, and parkland dedication on page 26. In a normal year and a non-normal year, we always put out the statement with large flashing red lights that all of these funds are heavily dependent upon the timing of new development, and thus these forecasts could increase or decrease. You'll see that there are some wild or significant, to put it in slightly less dramatic terms, in terms of percentage changes with some of these funds. And that's because we did greatly reduce a lot of these for fiscal 21, and we are sort of writing them based upon the development activity, which we have seen and do anticipate for fiscal 22. So you can examine those more. There's not huge, we're not talking huge dollars per se, but we are, again, trying to have our best forecast for each of these as we move forward. So if there's one revenue that we really don't know and are really unsure how quickly it will come back, and that has been greatly affected by the pandemic, it's hotel motel tax receipts. If you, and I looked at as I was doing the revenue model, I looked at the month-to-month collections, and collections for the month of April 2020 were off 90% from the year before in the hotel motel tax. Because, that's one that just shut down. We cut in more than half, and you can see it on the chart where we were averaging 3.5 to 3.7 to 4.1 to 4.3. Our fiscal 21 estimate is $1.985 million. And I will tell you that after 4 months, we're actually trending under that and may not be able to meet that target as we move forward. After a lot of discussion, we're going to put forward an estimate that it will grow from this lower base significantly, percentage-wise, by about 23% or $458,000 for the totality of fiscal 22. This assumes that there will be a gradual return and increase in this industry and with people staying in hotels. A lot of this, though, will depend upon completely the ability of the pandemic to be further under control and for us to return more to normal, to have tournaments, to have tourism rebound. It should not be surprising if it takes several years to restore this particular revenue stream to what we had seen pre-COVID. So we believe this is a prudent projection, even though it is a large increase year over year. Eric?
Yeah, I would just add, again, I feel good that we're not relying on this for operations because of what Michael just talked about. We do rely on it for some of our projects, especially some projects that impact our parks. But the good thing there is we've got a pretty substantial fund balance established in this fund that I think helps us navigate that and keep those projects going and not feel that those are at risk at all there. The one thing, I don't have a specific proposal on this, and I'm not even sure it's an issue. 25% of this we do dedicate to funding the CVB, and the county does the same with 1% of their hotel motel tax. And we always give that sort of in arrears. We give it the following year based on the previous calendar year of actual receipts. And I just think we ought to look at how big a drop off that presents for the CVB in this coming year. There may be a need to look at some way to maybe smooth that over a couple years, not really giving them any more than they'd be entitled to, but maybe looking at how we manage that so that they can continue to put our brand out there and be competitive when things start to return from normal. I'd hate to see them not able to respond to opportunity. So again, I don't even know that that is an issue, but that's something I think we ought to try to assess, is their ability to do the work that we need them to do to promote the community and to help drive tourism, which is a real positive economic factor in our community. And as Michael shared with you earlier, one of the areas hardest hit in the pandemic. So I just put that out as something to just plant a seed that there may be some need to think about how we manage that and make sure the CVB is able to do its job effectively in the next year or two, as the ripple effect of the pandemic continues through it.
The final detail slide we'll look at is the water and sewer fund. We're forecasting about a 4.5% increase here, about $900,000. This simply just assumes the same increases that we've had with rate plans for 2.5 in water and 3.5 in sewer. Those are consistent with prior 5-year plans. We will, of course, analyze this as we move forward into the spring. The increase that makes the overall higher takes into account interest income earnings that we've had, as well as takes a look at the fact that although we were basing prior years on those simple rate increases of 2.9 and 3.5, we were actually collecting higher amounts than what we're building the budgets on. So this is somewhat of a true up, and you can see even this is forecasting a lower amount than what we collected in 2020. So that builds a degree of conservatism, of course, into the collections for the fund. So in closing and next steps, our catchphrase to impart upon all of you is we have cautious optimism for this revenue forecast and moving forward as we go into fiscal 22 from fiscal 21. The economy throughout 2020 did not contract nearly as much as we anticipated, and many industries are still in a very solid footing. As always, events out of our control should temper expectations. But right now, as we see the world, we think things are in decent shape. Departmental budget reviews will start next month with you and run through April. And we will, of course, revise these revenue projections and accompany them with the budget projections, as well as a revised 5-year forecast, which will be very, very important in several factors, as Eric said. Number one, to really implement the Stronger Franklin framework to make sure that we leave the pandemic in a much better footing than we entered it, as well as figure out what resources truly can be balanced between operations and capital to focus on some of these long-term capital projects. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Any questions from any committee members? Do you want to have a motion to present this? Do you want to try to present this same presentation to the full board or to a workshop? How do you want to?
We don't typically bring it to the full board. It's just sort of our initial cut at revenue projections, and it's the underpinning of the budget we'll be developing between now and the first part of May. So I think sometimes I've shared it with the board as just a background document in the update that I share with you all. I would expect that's sufficient at this point. And if board members have questions, we can share from there or follow up from there.
So just cherry pick a few of the highlights, and as far as any presentation we make to the full board or to the workshop then. All right, so we don't need a recommendation from this committee. Let's go to item 7, fiscal year 2021 first quarter report. Eric, do you want to start that out? Christine, do you want to start that out?
Well, actually, I'm going to invite Mike Lowe, our comptroller,
All right, well, we have
to walk
Mike.
us through our
Mike
quarterly
started it
reports.
out there. How's that?
Good afternoon, everyone. Last month, the city's fiscal year 2020 financials were presented, and this month we have the results of the first 3 months after that fiscal year end. And several of the items that Michael, Christine, and Eric have covered will be seen in this report that we're getting ready to cover. The top item, which has been mentioned by Michael and Christine, is typically the general fund starts out the first quarter in a deficit position because there is not property tax billings yet. But because of the two grants that were mentioned, the 1.8 million and the CARES grant, which 1.1 of the 1.2 is going to the general fund, we actually are starting with a slight surplus in the general fund. So that actually is a position that we typically aren't in at the end of the first quarter. One other thing we noted is that some recurring revenue is starting higher in the first quarter. And these numbers are being compared back to pre-COVID numbers. We see local sales tax is 0.5% higher. We see state share taxes are 6.3% higher. And some of that is due to the fact there was a business tax adjustment last first quarter, but still it is 6.3% higher this year. And as Michael noted, alcohol taxes are 8.5% higher in the first quarter. One exception we did notice about having a higher starting amount is franchise fees. Is both of the natural gas and cable provider payments that we get in the first quarter were actually less than what we got. And I guess some of it goes back to the payments last year were prior to COVID, so that may have had an impact. For development fees that we've talked about, which are dependent on timing and type of development, we saw building permit revenue up 10%. We saw road impact fees up 72%. And we saw facilities tax up 76%. And I'll actually talk more about this when we get to monthly reports, but that was just kind of where we were at the end of the first quarter. In the street aid fund, gasoline tax is 5% less, and that is expected with less travel. If you look at the transit fund, 2/3 of the transfer from general has already been used. And this has become kind of consistent with recent years where transit gets much of their grant revenue near the end of the fiscal year. And another fund that Michael mentioned earlier about the hotel motel tax fund is this is the fund that seems to be the most affected by COVID, as hotel motel tax revenue is less than half what we had at this point last year. It is under 500,000 when last year was over 1 million. And also there's been a conference center loss in each of these first 3 months of the quarter. And the last thing, and it kind of goes across all the funds, is we're seeing less interest income as investments that were at higher rates mature. And as what we're having to do is we're having to reinvest at lower interest rates. So those were kind of the highlights that we had from the monthly report, or I'm sorry, from the quarterly report. And I do want to thank Margaret Wilson for putting together the quarterly report for us. But if the committee has any questions for us, we'll be glad to answer them.
Any questions from any committee member? If no questions, Michael, do you want to go to the monthly report then?
Be glad to, Mr. Chairman. The value of monthly reports is it lets us see if trends that we saw continue or have changed since the quarterly report. And I'm just going to go over maybe about 5 items. On Schedule 1, we now know what the October local sales tax is, and it actually is 6.1% over last October. And this now has made it where the year-to-date increase is actually now 1.9%.
Mike, may I make a quick comment?
Absolutely.
I just wanted to share with our committee that of course, the sales taxes are collected by the state, and then they remit our portion to the counties, and then the county trustee gives us our portion after that. So we certainly are at the end of the receiving line. However, we've been paying attention to some of the changes at the state level in collecting local option sales tax. And it seems to those of us who observe it that in probably during the pandemic time, at least even right before that, the state was making changes to collect more online sales tax. And certainly Mayor Moore has been involved in encouraging the state to work on that. And when the reason I wanted to comment that on here with Mike's comment about the October collections is that the state did note in their report on the October sales that there was a new online sales tax that they started collecting October 1st, and that on a statewide basis that they believed about a third of their increase was due to this, what they call marketplace facilitator online tax. These were online portals that were collecting or were selling items on behalf of a third party, and apparently for a long time that they had not been collecting sales tax. So we had a very favorable month of October, as did the state of Tennessee, and this has been a long effort, but it does seem like the acceleration toward online sales in the last period of time the state has seen the benefit for them also into modernizing that tax. So thank you for letting me jump in.
Thank you, Christine. On Schedule 2 for development revenue, this is where we actually did see a change in trend. Is during the first quarter, development revenue had been up. Then when we got to October, November, we actually have seen collections have gone down. And again, it all goes back to the timing and type of development, but it is something that we picked up on the monthly reports prior to having it on the quarterly report coming up. On Schedule 6, gasoline taxes for October 2020 continue to trend about 5% less than last year, just like we saw on the quarterly reports. On Schedule 7, hotel motel tax for October of 2020 continues to show the impact on COVID, as the revenue is still 55% less than last year. And the last item is on Schedule 8, the conference center in November 2020, it's actually now had 9 consecutive months of losses. And the last profit that we had was in February 2020, but we do know, this is being impacted by COVID.
Any questions of Mike on the monthly report from any committee member? Excellent report, Mike. We appreciate that. Just a general statement. I think I agree with Eric. It's a good thing we're not doing our daily budgets on hotel tax. And I don't see that does appear as if that's a pretty good ways out before that recovers. Even if you slow up the COVID-19 virus, you still got to get people back into the position of wanting to travel and jobs and the economy and whatnot. So with that, we'll look at that, but I don't expect that to have a big recovery anytime soon. Alderman Speedy or Alderman Peterson, do either one of you have any questions of either Mike Lowe or Michael Walters Young, City Administrator?
No questions. I concur on that. Good thing we're not on the conference center to fund anything either.
All right. No, not too many conferences going on. It might be a 2-person conference at a distance. If there's, Margaret, do you have a question?
I just want to tell these gentlemen that I think it's a miracle that they have done such a good job keeping us in line during these terrible times. I mean, to say that we're okay, we're not fatal, is amazing, because I know that there's some other places that are really hurting. And I think our committee has really done a great job, and I thank all of you for that.
If there are no other comment?
I was just going to say, you remember whenever we made the changes, that really made a
Oh,
big.
yeah, absolutely. Any
Thank you.
other business coming before the committee?
Just a quick reminder, we will start our meetings the next 3 months at 1 p.m. So we'll bump up our start time. That's not to give you more free time in the afternoon. That is to recognize that it'll take a little more time to get through the department presentations, and we appreciate your patience and time with that. And as Michael said, we'll start next month with those departmental presentations. It'll be police, fire, parks, and sanitation. So a big chunk of our budget we'll be talking about at the February meeting that'll start at 1 o'clock.
Thank you, Eric. Then I will entertain a motion to adjourn if there's no other business.
So moved.
Proper motion or a second?
Second.
Let's do a roll call vote on that. Alderman Speedy, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. As soon as the chair sees it on his screen. Or I'm satisfied with, I'm fine. She tells me that I'm fine. Okay, we are adjourned.